She was clearing tables after the wedding, until the billionaire recognized his late wife's wedding ring hanging from her necklace, leaving him in tears. The crystal chandeliers cast a soft, golden glow across the grand ballroom, their light dancing off hundreds of empty champagne flutes that Valerie Collins carefully stacked onto her serving tray. It was nearly midnight, and the Saturday wedding reception had finally wound down. The last of the guests had stumbled out into the cool Los Angeles night, leaving behind the telltale signs of celebration: crumpled napkins, half-eaten slices of cake, and the lingering scent of expensive perfume mixed with white roses. Valerie had been on her feet for 12 hours straight, but she didn't mind. The pay at Château Étoile, one of the city's most luxurious event venues, was better than any other waitressing gig she'd managed to land in her 27 years. She moved methodically through the room, her black uniform perfectly pressed despite the long shift, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun that was starting to come loose. She'd perfected the art of being invisible. In places like this, where millionaires celebrated and power brokers networked, servers were meant to fade into the background like living furniture. Valerie had learned that lesson early. Don't make eye contact. Don't speak unless spoken to. Collect your tips and go home. As she bent down to retrieve a fallen fork near the main table, her fingers absently touched the leather cord around her neck, a habit she'd had since childhood. Beneath her uniform, hidden from view, hung a ring. Not just any ring, but the only connection she had to a mother she'd never known. It was a delicate piece, white gold with 3 small diamonds arranged in a triangle, and an intricate interlacing pattern that had always seemed almost alive when the light caught it just right. The nuns at St. Teresa's home in Austin had told her the story so many times it had become part of her DNA. A baby, maybe 2 or 3 days old, left on the orphanage doorstep on a cold November morning in 1998. No note, no explanation, just a blood-stained blanket, and this ring, tied to her tiny wrist with a piece of twine. Sister Margaret had kept the ring safe until Valerie turned 18, then presented it to her with tears in her eyes. "Your mother wanted you to have this," the old nun had said. "Whatever happened to her, she made sure you'd know she loved you." Valerie straightened up, balancing the tray loaded with glassware, and turned toward the kitchen. That's when it happened. Her foot caught on the leg of a chair someone had pushed out at an odd angle. She stumbled, not badly enough to fall, but enough that the tray tilted dangerously. Glasses clinked against each other in a sound that made her wince. She steadied herself quickly, grateful nothing had broken. But in the commotion, the leather cord had slipped outside her uniform. The ring now hung visible against the black fabric, catching the light from the chandelier above. "Excuse me," the voice came from behind her, deep and strained. Valerie turned to see a man she hadn't noticed before, sitting alone at one of the side tables. He must have been waiting for his driver. Wealthy people didn't drive themselves home from events like this. He was in his early 50s, she guessed, with salt and pepper hair perfectly styled and a charcoal suit that probably cost more than she made in 6 months. But it wasn't his expensive clothes that struck her. It was his face. All the color had drained from it, and his eyes, bright blue and now brimming with tears, were fixed on her chest. No, not on her chest, on the ring. "Sir, are you okay?" Valerie asked, instinctively taking a step back. "Do you need me to call someone?" The man stood up so abruptly his chair scraped against the marble floor. His hands were shaking. "That ring," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Where did you get that ring?" Valerie's hand flew to her chest, her fingers closing protectively around the jewelry. She'd been asked about it before. People sometimes noticed it when she wore it outside her clothes on her days off. They'd compliment the craftsmanship, ask if it was vintage, but no one had ever reacted like this. It was my mother's," she said carefully. "Your mother's." He repeated the words like they were in a foreign language. He moved closer, and Valerie could see his hands trembling. "Please, may I see it? Just for a moment?" Every instinct told her to say no, to tuck the ring back under her uniform and walk away. But something in his eyes stopped her, a desperate, drowning look that spoke of old wounds and unbearable pain. "Okay," she heard herself say, "but I'm not taking it off." Richard Sanders, though she didn't know his name yet, nodded quickly. He moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something woody and expensive. His eyes never left the ring as she lifted it slightly, holding it out so he could examine it. She watched his face as he studied the piece. His jaw clenched. A tear spilled down his cheek, then another. His breath came in short, sharp gasps like he was fighting to stay in control. "The pattern," he whispered. "The 3 diamonds, oh God, oh God." "Sir, you're scaring me," Valerie said, but she didn't pull away. With trembling fingers, he reached out, not to touch the ring, but to gesture toward it. May I see the inside? There should be an engraving." Valerie's heart pounded. In all these years, she'd never looked closely at the inside of the ring. It was too small, the band too narrow. But now, with shaking hands, she slipped it off the leather cord and tilted it toward the light. There, in tiny Gothic script, were 4 letters and a symbol she'd never noticed before. Ier, Eternos. "What does it mean?" she asked. Richard Sanders made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Isabella and Richard, Eternos. Eternal." He looked up at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. "I designed that ring myself. I had it made by a jeweler in Barcelona. There's not another one like it in the world. I gave it to my wife, Isabella, when we got married 29 years ago." The ballroom seemed to tilt. Valerie gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. That's impossible. "My wife disappeared 27 years ago," Richard continued, the words tumbling out now. "October 1998. She was 8 months pregnant with our daughter. The police searched everywhere. We never found her body, we never found anything. That ring disappeared with her." Valerie's mind was racing. October 1998, just a few weeks before she was found at the orphanage. There must be some mistake. Maybe it's just similar. "No." Richard's voice was firm now, despite the tears streaming down his face. "I designed every detail of that ring. The interlacing pattern represents infinity. The 3 diamonds represent past, present, and future. The engraving," his voice broke. "I chose those words because I wanted her to know our love would last forever, even beyond death." "I don't understand," Valerie whispered. "The nuns said I was found with this ring tied to my wrist. I was just a baby. They said I was maybe 2 or 3 days old." "What date?" Richard asked urgently. "What date were you found?" "November 15th, 1998. The number seemed to hit him like a physical blow. He sat down heavily in the nearest chair, his face in his hands. "Isabella disappeared on October 10th. She would have given birth." He looked up, his eyes wild with a terrible hope. "She would have given birth right around then, mid-November." The implications hung in the air between them, too enormous to fully grasp. Valerie clutched the ring so tightly the edges cut into her palm. "What are you saying?" she asked, even though she already knew. Richard Sanders stood up again, and this time when he looked at her, it was with the expression of a man staring at a ghost. "I think," he said slowly, each word weighted with 27 years of grief and sudden, impossible hope, "that you might be my daughter." Richard Sanders hadn't slept in 36 hours. He sat in his penthouse office overlooking downtown Los Angeles, watching the sun rise over a city that suddenly felt completely different than it had 2 days ago. The skyline was the same. The traffic below was the same. But everything had changed the moment he saw that ring. His hand trembled as he raised a cup of coffee to his lips, his 4th since midnight. On the desk in front of him lay a photograph he hadn't looked at in years. Isabella, radiant and glowing, 7 months pregnant, standing in the garden of their old house in Beverly Hills. October 1998, 3 weeks before she disappeared. He traced her face with his finger, the way he used to trace it in real life when she slept beside him. "I found her, Bella," he whispered to the photograph. "I think I found our baby girl." The memory of that night, October 10th, 1998, was seared into his brain like a brand. He'd been working late, as usual, building his real estate empire, making deals, convinced he had all the time in the world. Isabella had called around 8, her voice strained. "Richard, I don't feel well. Something's wrong. I'll be home in an hour, sweetheart, I promise." But an hour had turned into 2 when a potential investor showed up unannounced. By the time Richard got home at 10:47 p.m., he'd never forget that exact time. The house was dark. Isabella's car was in the driveway, her purse on the kitchen counter, her phone on the dining room table. But Isabella was gone. He'd called the police immediately. They'd searched everywhere. The neighbors had seen nothing. The security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned that afternoon, something that seemed insignificant at the time, but haunted him later. Isabella had simply vanished, as if she'd never existed at all. The police had investigated him first, of course. The husband was always the first suspect. Richard had cooperated fully, submitted to polygraphs, opened his finances. He had an alibi. Dozens of people at his office had seen him that night. Eventually, they'd cleared him. But by then, precious weeks had been lost. Months became years. The case went cold. The detective assigned to it retired. Life moved on for everyone except Richard. He'd thrown himself into work with manic intensity, building his company into a billion-dollar empire, as if money and success could fill the crater. Isabella's absence had left in his chest. He never dated again, never even looked at another woman. How could he, when he still wore his wedding ring? When he still slept on his side of the bed? When her ghost lived in every corner of his life? A knock on the office door pulled him from his memories. "Come in," he called, quickly wiping his eyes. Patrick Moore entered, carrying a thick folder. Richard had hired the private investigator less than 24 hours ago, immediately after leaving Château Étoile. Moore had a reputation as the best in the business. Expensive, discreet, and relentless. "You work fast," Richard said, gesturing to the folder. "You're paying me to," Moore replied with a slight smile. He was in his 50s, built like a boxer who'd retired but never stopped training. In this case, well, let's just say it's not every day I get to investigate something like this. He opened the folder, spreading documents across Richard's desk. Valerie Collins, born approximately November 12th or 13th, 1998, based on the pediatrician's examination when she was found, discovered on the doorstep of St. Teresa's Home for Children in Austin, Texas, at approximately 5:47 a.m. on November 15th. Richard leaned forward, drinking in every detail. "Sister Margaret O'Brien was the one who found her," Moore continued. "She's 82 now, still alive, still sharp as a tack. I spoke with her this morning. She remembers that day like it was yesterday." He pulled out a faded report. Baby was wrapped in a blue blanket, heavily stained with blood. The ring was tied to her left wrist with ordinary kitchen twine. No note, no identification, nothing. "The blanket," Richard interrupted. "Do they still have it?" Moore shook his head. "Destroyed years ago, unfortunately. Standard procedure after a certain amount of time. But Sister Margaret described it in detail. Pale blue with white stars. She remembered because she thought it was odd. Most baby blankets are pink or yellow, gender-neutral colors." Richard's breath caught. "Isabella bought a blanket like that. For the nursery. She said she didn't care if we were having a boy or girl. She loved the stars. The blood on the blanket was significant," Moore continued. The police report from 1998 noted it appeared to be from childbirth, the placement, the amount. Consistent with someone who'd given birth recently without medical care. The words hit Richard like punches. Isabella had given birth alone, scared, bleeding, and somehow, impossibly, she'd made sure their baby got to safety. "What about the orphanage records?" Richard asked. "What happened to Valerie after that?" Moore flipped through more pages. "She stayed at St. Teresa's until she was 18. Never adopted. Apparently she was a difficult child, acting out, running away, trust issues." "Of course she had trust issues," Richard said quietly. "She was abandoned. The nuns did their best. Sister Margaret especially took her under her wing. Valerie graduated high school. Decent grades despite everything. Took some community college classes but had to drop out to work full-time. Been bouncing between waitressing jobs ever since. Trying to make ends meet." Moore's expression softened. "By all accounts. She's a good kid. Works hard. Keeps to herself. Hasn't been in any trouble." Richard absorbed this, imagining all the birthdays he'd missed. All the scraped knees he hadn't been there to bandage. All the nightmares he hadn't been able to chase away. 27 years of his daughter growing up without him. "I want DNA tests done immediately," he said. "The best lab, the fastest processing time. Money is no object." "Already arranged," Moore said. "I have a contact at GeneTech Labs. They can have results in 7 days if you're willing to pay the rush fee. Whatever it costs. Moore pulled out another document. Now, the bigger question. If Valerie is your daughter, what happened to Isabella? I've been digging into the original case file from 1998. His expression darkened. There's something that was never properly investigated. Your business partner at the time, Arthur Coleman. He left the country 3 months after Isabella disappeared, sold everything and moved to Guatemala City. Richard's head snapped up. Arthur, you remember him. Of course. We started the company together in the early 90s. Richard's mind raced. But Arthur and I had a falling out. He wanted to take the company in a different direction, cut corners, make deals I wasn't comfortable with. We bought him out in 97. He was angry about it. Felt I'd forced him out, but what? Richard's face went pale. He was obsessed with Isabella. I thought it was harmless at the time. She was beautiful. Men noticed her. But he would make comments, suggestions. Once, at a company party, I caught him following her to the bathroom. He claimed he was just drunk, and I believed him because I wanted to believe him. He was my friend. Moore nodded grimly. After Isabella disappeared, did police question him? I don't know. Maybe. They questioned everyone we knew. But Arthur had already left the country by the time I thought to suggest him as a suspect. And honestly, I was so destroyed, I wasn't thinking clearly about anything. Well, he's still in Guatemala, Moore said. Living quite comfortably, from what I can tell. Big house, nice car. Interesting, considering he supposedly lost everything in bad investments. You think he had something to do with Isabella's disappearance? I think it's worth investigating. The timing is suspicious. Your wife vanishes. He flees the country within months. And now we have evidence that your wife gave birth and that child ended up at an orphanage. Those aren't coincidences. Richard stood abruptly, pacing to the window. His mind was spinning with possibilities, each one worse than the last. If Arthur took her, if he hurt her, let's focus on what we can prove, Moore said calmly. First, we confirm Valerie's paternity. Then we build the case from there. I've already got calls in to some contacts in Guatemala. We'll find out what Arthur's been up to all these years. Richard turned back to face him. What about Valerie? Does she know you're investigating? Not yet. I thought you'd want to talk to her first. Richard pulled out his phone, hesitating before dialing. Valerie had given him her number before leaving Château Étoile, though her hands had shaken as she typed it in. This is crazy, she'd said. This whole thing is absolutely crazy. I know, he'd replied, but we owe it to ourselves, and to Isabella, to find out the truth. Now. He pressed call and waited. She answered on the third ring, her voice wary. Hello? Valerie? It's Richard Sanders. Is this a good time? A pause. I'm at work. I have a break in 20 minutes. I'll make this quick. I've hired an investigator. His name is Patrick Moore, and he's already found documentation about the night you were found. It all matches up. The dates, the circumstances, everything. Okay. Her voice was small, uncertain. I've also arranged for DNA testing. The lab is called Gene Tech, and they're expecting us tomorrow morning at 9. Would you be willing to do that? Another pause. Longer this time. Richard could hear kitchen noise in the background, the clatter of dishes, someone shouting an order. If I do this, Valerie said finally, and it turns out I'm not your daughter, what happens then? Do we just forget this ever happened? No, Richard said firmly. If the test says we're not related, then we'll know, and I'll help you find your real family if you want. But Valerie, I saw that ring. I designed it. There's no mistake. People make mistakes all the time, she whispered. My whole life has been one long mistake. Why should this be different? Richard's heart broke for her. Because this time, you're not alone. Whatever the truth is. We'll face it together. I promise you that. He heard her take a shaky breath. Okay. Tomorrow morning at 9. Text me the address. Thank you, Valerie. Don't thank me yet. We don't know anything for sure. But as Richard hung up and looked again at Isabella's photograph, he knew in his bones what the test would say. He'd already lost 27 years with his daughter. He wasn't going to lose another day. Across town, in her cramped studio apartment, Valerie Collins sat on her second-hand couch, still in her work uniform, and stared at the ring in her palm. For 27 years, it had been just a piece of jewelry, a mystery she'd long ago accepted would never be solved. Now it was a key that might unlock everything, or destroy the fragile peace she'd made with her life. She thought about Richard Sanders with his expensive suit and his sad eyes and his impossible story. She thought about having a father, being someone's daughter, belonging to somebody after a lifetime of belonging to no one. And she thought about how much it would hurt if it all turned out to be a mistake. "Please," she whispered to the ring, to the mother she'd never known, to God or fate, or whoever might be listening. "Please let this be real." The waiting room at Gene Tech Labs was nothing like Valerie had expected. She'd imagined something clinical and cold, all white walls and fluorescent lights. Instead, it looked more like an upscale hotel lobby. Soft leather chairs, abstract art on the walls, a water feature trickling peacefully in the corner. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, trying not to fidget with the ring she'd tucked back under her shirt. Across from her, Richard flipped through a magazine without really seeing it. They'd barely spoken since meeting in the parking lot 20 minutes ago. "Mrs. Collins, Mr. Sanders?" A woman in a white lab coat appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. "We're ready for you now." The actual test was anticlimactic. A simple cheek swab, done in less than 5 minutes. The technician explained the process. Genetic markers, probability percentages, laboratory protocols. But Valerie heard none of it. Her mind was somewhere else entirely, caught between hope and terror. "Results will be ready in 7 days," the technician said cheerfully. "We'll call you both as soon as they come in. 7 days, 168 hours, 10,080 minutes of not knowing." "Thank you," Richard said, shaking the woman's hand. Then, to Valerie, "Can I buy you breakfast? There's a cafe across the street." Valerie hesitated. She had a shift at the restaurant starting at 11, but it was only 9:30, and the thought of going back to her empty apartment, alone with her spiraling thoughts, was unbearable. "Okay," she said, "but nothing fancy. I can't afford my treat." Richard interrupted gently. "Please." The cafe was one of those trendy places with Edison bulbs and reclaimed wood tables. Valerie ordered coffee and a croissant, the cheapest items on the menu. Richard ordered the same, though she suspected he usually ate more substantial breakfasts. For a few minutes, they sat in silence, both stirring their coffee more than necessary. "Tell me about her," Valerie said suddenly. "About Isabella. What was she like?" Richard's expression softened immediately. She was everything." He pulled out his phone, scrolling until he found a photo. "This is my favorite picture of her." Valerie took the phone with trembling hands. The woman in the photo was stunning. Dark hair, warm brown eyes, a smile that seemed to light up the screen. She was laughing at something off camera, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. "She's beautiful," Valerie whispered. She was, but that wasn't even the best thing about her. Richard's voice grew thick with emotion. She was kind, really. Genuinely kind. She volunteered at a children's hospital every Tuesday. She remembered everyone's birthday once. She saw a homeless man outside our favorite restaurant, and instead of just giving him money, she invited him inside and bought him dinner. Sat with him for an hour, just talking, treating him like he mattered. Valerie felt tears prickling her eyes. "She sounds amazing." She was terrified about becoming a mother, Richard continued. Not because she didn't want it. She wanted it desperately, but she'd lost her own mother when she was young, and she was so afraid she wouldn't know how to be a good parent. He laughed softly. "I told her that the fact she was worried about it proved she'd be great. Bad parents don't worry about being bad parents." "What happened to her?" Valerie asked. "That night she disappeared. I mean, what do you think happened?" Richard's face darkened. "For years, I thought she'd been in an accident. Hit by a car, mugged, I don't know. Something random and terrible. The police investigated every possibility. Foul play. Running away even." He couldn't finish that sentence. But nothing made sense. She had no reason to leave. We were happy. We were about to have a baby. And now I think someone took her. His jaw clenched. Someone who knew her, who knew our routine, who knew I'd be working late that night. He met Valerie's eyes. "Patrick Moore is investigating my old business partner, Arthur Coleman. He left the country right after Isabella disappeared. That can't be a coincidence. Valerie absorbed this, trying to imagine her mother, if Isabella really was her mother, being taken, held somewhere, giving birth alone and terrified. If someone took her, and she had the baby, had me, then how did I end up at the orphanage? Why didn't she come with me? The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to voice. I don't know, Richard said quietly, but I'm going to find out. Whatever happened to Isabella, whatever the truth is, I need to know, don't you? Valerie nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Over the next 7 days, Richard and Valerie fell into an unexpected routine. He'd text her every morning, nothing intrusive, just a simple, good morning, or hope you have a good day. She'd respond with a thumbs-up emoji, not quite ready for more but appreciating the gesture. On day 3, he showed up at the restaurant where she worked, sitting in her section. She'd almost dropped her notepad when she saw him. "What are you doing here?" she'd hissed, glancing nervously at her manager. "Having lunch," he'd said innocently. "Is that allowed?" He'd ordered the most expensive thing on the menu, left a $300 tip, and been gone before she could protest. On day 5, she'd agreed to meet him for coffee again. This time, the conversation came easier. He told her about growing up in Chicago, about how he'd built his company from nothing, about the early days with Isabella, when they were so poor they'd shared a studio apartment smaller than Valerie's current place. She'd told him about the orphanage, about Sister Margaret and the other nuns who'd tried their best, about being the kid nobody wanted, too old, too angry, too difficult, about the families who'd considered adopting her but always chose someone else. "I used to make up stories," she admitted, "about my real parents. Sometimes they were celebrities who'd had to give me up to protect me from the paparazzi. Sometimes they were spies on a dangerous mission. Sometimes they were just good people who'd loved me but died in some tragic accident." She laughed bitterly. "Never once did I imagine my father was a billionaire in Los Angeles. I looked for you," Richard said intensely. "After Isabella disappeared, I looked everywhere for any sign of her, any clue, if I'd known, if I'd had any idea she might have given birth, that there might be a baby out there somewhere. I would have searched every orphanage in the country. You have to believe that." "I do," Valerie said, and realized she meant it. On day 6, Richard invited her to his house. She'd refused at first. It felt too intimate, too much like accepting something she wasn't ready for. But he'd persisted. "I have something I want to show you. Isabella's things. I've kept everything exactly as she left it. Maybe you'd like to see." So she'd gone, taking 3 buses because she couldn't afford an Uber and was too proud to let him send a car. His house turned out to be a mansion in Beverly Hills, the kind of place she'd only seen in movies. She'd almost turned around and left, but Richard had been waiting at the door, his expression so hopeful and vulnerable that she couldn't bring herself to run. He'd led her upstairs to a bedroom that had clearly been intended as a nursery. It was frozen in time, 1998 decor, stuffed animals still in their packaging, a crib that had never been used, and in the corner, a rocking chair with a blue blanket draped over it, a blue blanket with white stars. "Oh my God," Valerie breathed, moving toward it like she was in a trance. She touched the soft fabric, and something deep in her chest cracked open. "This is," Sister Margaret said. "It's the same blanket," Richard confirmed, his voice rough. "Or at least, it matches. Isabella bought 2, one for the crib, one to keep in the car. The one from the car disappeared with her." Valerie sank into the rocking chair, clutching the blanket, and for the first time since this whole impossible situation began, she let herself cry. Not quiet tears, but huge, gasping sobs that shook her entire body. Richard knelt beside her, one hand hovering uncertainly near her shoulder, before finally, gently, making contact. "It's okay," he murmured. "Let it out. It's okay. I'm sorry," she choked out. "I'm sorry, what if the test says I'm not your daughter? What if this is all some cruel coincidence and I'm nobody again?" "You're not nobody," Richard said fiercely. "You're Valerie Collins, and you survived 27 years on your own, and you're one of the strongest people I've ever met. The test doesn't change that. But I want it to be true," she admitted, the words tumbling out. "I want you to be my father. I want Isabella to be my mother. I want to belong to someone for once in my miserable life. And that's so pathetic. And I hate myself for wanting it so badly when we barely know each other. It's not pathetic. Richard's eyes were wet too now. I want it too. More than I've wanted anything in 27 years. Day 7 arrived like an executioner. Valerie couldn't eat breakfast, couldn't focus on anything. She'd called in sick to work, the first time she'd ever done that, and spent the morning pacing her tiny apartment, phone clutched in her hand. When it rang at 2:17 p.m., she almost didn't answer. As long as she didn't know, it could still be true. Schrodinger's daughter, simultaneously his and not his. But she answered, "Ms. Collins." The technician's voice was professionally neutral. "Your results are ready. Would you like to come in? Or should I tell you over the phone?" "Phone," Valerie whispered. "Just tell me, please." "Of course. I have Mr. Sanders on the line as well. Are you both ready?" "Yes," Richard's voice said, tight with tension. "The test shows a 99.9% probability of paternity. Mr. Sanders, you are Valerie's biological father." The world stopped. Valerie heard the words, understood them intellectually, but couldn't quite process what they meant. She was someone's daughter. She had a father. She belonged. "Can you repeat that?" Richard's voice cracked. "Please, I need to hear it again." "You are Valerie's biological father," the technician repeated, warmer this time. "Congratulations to you both." Valerie dropped the phone, hands shaking too hard to hold it. She heard Richard's voice, distant and tinny, calling her name. She picked it back up. "I'm here," she managed. "Can I?" He sounded like he was crying. "Can I come see you, please?" "Yes," she said. "Yes, Dad." The word felt strange and perfect on her tongue. And on the other end of the line, Richard Sanders, her father, broke down completely. Patrick Moore spread photographs across Richard's desk. Each showed the same man. Older, grayer, but unmistakable. Arthur Coleman, living comfortably in Guatemala City, oblivious that his past was catching up. "That's him," Richard said, voice hard as stone. He picked up a photo of Arthur at an outdoor cafe, expensive sunglasses, laughing at his phone, living his best life while Isabella. 2 weeks had passed since the DNA results. 2 weeks of joy mixed with growing rage. If Valerie was alive, if she'd been left at that orphanage with Isabella's ring, then someone had taken Isabella, kept her somewhere, made sure the baby survived while Isabella. "Tell me everything," Richard said. Valerie sat beside him, silent but present. She'd moved into the mansion 3 days ago, into a guest suite Richard had quietly redecorated. She still seemed uncomfortable with the luxury, still apologized for existing in spaces she had every right to occupy. Moore pulled out a file. "Arthur Coleman, 54. Met you in 1989 when you were both breaking into real estate, right?" Richard nodded. "Young, hungry, convinced we'd change the world. Started Sanders Coleman Properties in 1992. Solid partnership for a few years. You handled the creative side. Arthur handled the numbers." "What changed?" Valerie asked quietly. "Arthur got greedy," Richard said. "Pushed for deals that didn't feel right. Properties with murky ownership, questionable investors. I wanted to build something legitimate. Arthur just wanted to get rich quick. The split happened early 1997, Moore said. You bought him out for $2 million. Generous, considering the company's value then. I thought I was being fair. Arthur didn't see it that way." Moore pulled out emails. "He sent these to mutual friends, complaining you'd forced him out, stolen his dream, left him with nothing. $2 million isn't nothing," Valerie said. "It is when you compare it to what Sanders Properties became," Moore replied. "Within a year, it was worth 20 times what Arthur sold for. By 1998, 50 times that." Richard closed his eyes. "I ran into him at a charity event that summer. He was drunk, cornered me in the bathroom, ranted about how I'd screwed him. Then he said Isabella was too good for me, that she deserved someone who'd actually appreciate her." "Did he threaten you?" "Not explicitly, but the way he looked at her." Richard's hands curled into fists. "I should have known he was dangerous." Moore pulled out another document. 3 months after Isabella disappeared, Arthur liquidated everything, sold his condo, car, emptied his accounts. flew to Guatemala City and never came back. Why Guatemala? Valerie asked. No extradition treaty for certain crimes, low cost of living, $2 million properly invested could last a lifetime. He showed financial records, bought a house in Zona 10, a nice neighborhood, lives well but not extravagantly. To everyone there, he's just another American retiree. Have you talked to him? Not yet. Wanted to gather evidence first, but I've talked to people who knew him in '98. His secretary, lawyer, landlord. Moore opened a notebook. Everyone says the same thing. After the buyout, Arthur became unstable, drinking heavily, disheveled, making inappropriate comments about you and Isabella. What kind of comments? That Isabella married the wrong partner, that she'd realize it eventually, that when your marriage fell apart, he'd be waiting. Moore's expression darkened. His secretary quit after he asked her to find out Isabella's schedule, said his obsession creeped her out. Valerie had gone pale. You think he took her because he wanted her? I think he wanted to hurt Richard, Moore said carefully. Whether it was obsession or revenge or both, I can't say. But the timeline fits. The motive fits. His departure fits. Richard stood, pacing to the window. The Los Angeles skyline gleamed in afternoon sun. The same city where Isabella had disappeared. We need to confront him, make him tell us what happened. Guatemala authorities are cooperative, Moore said. I've contacted Inspector Ramirez there. He's willing to bring Arthur in for questioning, but we need something concrete. Right now, we have circumstantial evidence. What about the blanket? Valerie asked. The one I was wrapped in. Can't they test Isabella's blood? Moore shook his head. Destroyed years ago. Standard procedure. Then what? Richard demanded. We let him keep living comfortably while Isabella is... He couldn't say it. If Valerie was alive but Isabella wasn't with her, then Isabella was almost certainly dead. We build the case methodically, Moore said. Gather every piece of evidence, track down witnesses, create an airtight timeline, then present it to authorities. How long? Weeks, maybe months. We don't have months, Richard said. Every day is another day. Arthur pretends he's innocent. Another day, Isabella goes without justice. Dad. Valerie's voice was soft but firm. Only the second time she'd called him that. We have to do this right. If we rush it, he might get away completely. Is that what you want? Richard looked at his daughter. So young, but so strong. No, he admitted. Then we trust Patrick. We let him do his job, and when the time comes, we make Arthur answer for what he did. Moore nodded. I'll keep digging meanwhile. Maintain normal routines. If Arthur has anyone watching, we don't want to tip him off. After Moore left, they sat in silence. Are you okay? Richard asked. Valerie laughed humorlessly. I found out I have a father. Found out my mother was probably murdered. Found out the man who did it is living free. I'm in a mansion when 2 weeks ago I worried about rent. I have a dad who wants me after 27 years of feeling unwanted. So, no, I'm not okay. But I don't think I'm supposed to be. Richard hesitated before putting his arm around her shoulders. She leaned in slightly. I'm going to make this right, he said. Whatever it takes. Arthur Coleman will pay for what he did. To Isabella. To us. To you. I know, Valerie said. But right now, can we just sit here? Can we just be a dad and daughter before we think about all the rest? Richard pulled her closer. For the first time in 27 years, he held his daughter. Outside, the sun set over Los Angeles, painting the sky orange and pink. Somewhere in Guatemala, Arthur Coleman was having dinner, unaware the walls were closing in, but they would close. Richard would make sure of it. For Isabella, for Valerie, for the family stolen from him, justice was coming. The call came at 6:42 a.m. on a Tuesday. Richard grabbed his phone before the second ring. Moore, we got him. The detective's voice was tight with excitement. Inspector Ramirez and I brought Arthur in for questioning 2 hours ago, Richard. You need to get down here. Bring Valerie. She needs to hear this. 14 hours later, Richard and Valerie sat in a conference room at Guatemala City Police Headquarters, watching a video feed. Inspector Ramirez had set everything up with quiet efficiency. This is live, he explained. Mr. Coleman is in the interrogation room with Detective Moore and my partner. We've been questioning him for 6 hours. On screen. Arthur Coleman looked nothing like the confident man in Moore's photographs. His clothes were rumpled, hair disheveled, dark circles under his eyes. He kept rubbing his face with shaking hands. "I don't know what you want me to say." Arthur's voice came through the speakers. "I left the country for business opportunities. There's no crime in that. But there might be a crime in why you left," Moore said conversationally, "in what you were running from." "I wasn't running from anything." Moore slid a photograph across the table. "Isabella? 7 months pregnant, glowing and beautiful." Arthur flinched. "You remember Isabella Sanders? Of course, Richard's wife. Tragic what happened." "What did happen to her, Arthur? How should I know?" "She disappeared." Moore pulled out another photograph. "Valerie. Recent. Laughing in a cafe. Do you know who this is?" Arthur barely glanced. "No. Should I? Her name is Valerie Collins. She's 27 years old, and she's Richard Sanders's daughter." The color drained from Arthur's face. "That's impossible," he whispered. "Isabella was pregnant when she disappeared. The baby would have died with her." "Interesting choice of words," Moore said quietly. "Would have died with her. You seem very certain about Isabella's fate." "I'm not certain. It's been 27 years. Everyone assumed wrong." Moore opened a folder. Pulling out documents. DNA test results, birth records, hospital reports from the orphanage where Valerie was found. Isabella's baby survived. Arthur, found November 15th, 1998, in Austin, Texas, wrapped in a blood-stained blanket with Isabella's wedding ring tied to her wrist. Arthur's breathing became rapid and shallow. His hands trembled. "I don't understand what this has to do with me." "Don't you?" Moore leaned forward. "You disappeared 3 months after Isabella did. Sold everything, fled to a country with no extradition treaty. That's not innocent behavior." "Arthur, I had debts. I needed a fresh start." "What debts?" "You'd just received $2 million from Richard. But your bank records show a series of cash withdrawals before Isabella disappeared. Large amounts. October 8th, $15,000. October 9th, $10,000. October 10th, the day Isabella disappeared, $20,000. That's $45,000 in 3 days. What did you need that much cash for?" Arthur said nothing, sweat beading on his forehead in the conference room. Valerie's hand found Richard's. He squeezed tightly. "Here's what I think happened," Moore said gently. "I think you were obsessed with Isabella Sanders. When Richard bought you out, you blamed him for ruining your life, and you decided to take the one thing he loved most." "No," Arthur said weakly. "You hired someone to help you, those withdrawals. That was payment, wasn't it? Payment to kidnap a pregnant woman and hide her. Stop. You knew Richard's schedule. You knew he'd be working late. You knew Isabella would be home alone. And you took her. Stop." Arthur's voice cracked. "Just stop. Where did you take her, Arthur? What did you do?" "I didn't want to hurt her." The words burst out like they'd been building pressure for 27 years. "I never wanted to hurt her. I just wanted Richard to know what it felt like. To lose everything." The room went silent. "So you did take her," Moore said quietly. Arthur's face crumpled. He put his head in his hands, shoulders shaking. "God forgive me. God forgive me for what I did." In the conference room, Richard couldn't breathe. Valerie cried silently. "Tell us what happened," Moore said. "All of it." Arthur looked up, face blotchy and wet. "I hired 2 men, told them I just needed to scare her. But when they brought her to me, when I saw her," he wiped his face, "she was terrified. She kept crying, begging me to let her go, telling me the baby was coming soon." "Where did you take her?" "An old warehouse outside Corpus Christi. I owned it through a shell company. It was supposed to be temporary. A few days to make Richard suffer. Then I'd let her go. But you didn't." Arthur shook his head. "She went into labor too early. The stress, the fear. But she started having contractions, and I panicked. I couldn't take her to a hospital. They'd ask questions, so I left her there. I told one of the men to watch her and I left." Richard made a sound like a wounded animal. Valerie sobbed openly. "When did you come back?" Moore asked. 5 days later, I was terrified. But when I got there," Arthur's voice broke. "The baby was gone, And Isabella was dead. Arthur nodded. What happened to the baby? I don't know. The man I'd hired, Marcus, he was gone too. I thought maybe he'd panicked, killed the baby, dumped it. I swear to God I thought the baby was dead. But he didn't kill her, Moore said. He took that baby to an orphanage, tied Isabella's wedding ring to her wrist. Why do you think he did that? I don't know. Maybe he had a conscience. Maybe Isabella begged him. I never saw him again. What did you do with Isabella's body? Arthur's face went gray. There was a vacant lot near the warehouse. I buried her there that night. Then I sold the property through the shell company. They built an apartment complex on it 6 months later. Richard stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward. He couldn't watch anymore. Valerie wrapped her arms around her father as he broke down. We can locate the site, Inspector Ramirez said gently, pausing the video. Mr. Coleman has provided the location. With ground-penetrating radar and excavation, we should recover Isabella's remains. How long? Richard managed. Weeks, maybe a month, on screen. Frozen mid-confession, Arthur Coleman sat with his head in his hands. What happens to him now? Valerie asked. Extradited to the United States, charged with kidnapping, false imprisonment, and felony murder. With his confession, he'll spend the rest of his life in prison. Richard looked at the broken man who'd taken everything. He'd expected to feel rage. Instead, he just felt hollow. I want to see him, Richard said. I want to look him in the eye. Richard, Moore's voice came through the speakers. I need to, please. A long pause. Then, give us 10 minutes. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the construction site that had once been a vacant lot on the outskirts of Corpus Christi. Yellow police tape cordoned off a section of the parking lot behind the Cedar Grove apartments, a modest complex that had stood for 26 years, its residents completely unaware of what lay beneath their feet. Richard stood behind the barrier, watching the excavation team work with painstaking precision. Ground-penetrating radar had identified an anomaly 3 days ago, exactly where Arthur had said it would be. Now, forensic archaeologists carefully removed layers of asphalt and soil, treating the site like the crime scene it was. Valerie stood beside him, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm. They'd barely spoken since arriving from Guatemala 2 weeks ago. What was there to say? Arthur's confession had given them answers. But answers didn't ease the pain. If anything, knowing the details made it worse. How much longer? Valerie asked quietly, watching a woman in a white coverall carefully brush dirt away from something in the ground. They said it could take days, Richard replied. They have to document everything, photograph every step, if this goes to trial. When it goes to trial, Valerie corrected. Arthur confessed, but his lawyers will try everything to get it thrown out. We need the physical evidence to be perfect. Richard glanced at his daughter, impressed as always by her strength. She'd grown up so fast in the past month. The scared, uncertain waitress he'd met at Château Étoile had transformed into someone fierce and determined. Isabella would have been so proud. Mr. Sanders, a woman approached, pulling down her face mask. Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead forensic anthropologist. We've found something. Would you like to see? Richard's heart clenched. Is it? We believe so. But I should warn you, it's not going to be easy to look at. Richard nodded, helping Valerie duck under the police tape. They followed Dr. Chen to the excavation site, where several team members stood back respectfully. In the carefully dug pit, partially revealed by the removal of soil, were bones, human bones, arranged in what was clearly a burial position. And beside them, glinting in the sunlight, was something that made Richard's breath catch. A silver bracelet, tarnished with age but unmistakable. I gave her that, he whispered. For our first anniversary. She never took it off. Dr. Chen nodded sympathetically. We'll need to do formal identification through dental records and DNA analysis, but based on the location, the age of the remains, and the personal effects, I'm confident this is Isabella Sanders. Valerie made a small sound beside him, and Richard pulled her close. After 27 years of not knowing, of hoping against hope that maybe Isabella was alive somewhere, amnesia or captivity or some other explanation, now they knew for certain. Isabella was gone. She'd been gone all along, buried in an unmarked grave while life went on without her. Can I... Richard's voice broke. "Can I have a moment?" Dr. Chen gestured to her team, and they stepped back, giving them privacy. Richard knelt at the edge of the pit, Valerie beside him. For a long moment, they simply looked at the remains of the woman who connected them, mother and wife, the bridge between past and present. "I'm sorry," Richard said, not sure if he was talking to Isabella or to Valerie or to God. "I'm so sorry I didn't find you sooner. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me. I'm sorry for everything." "She knew you loved her," Valerie said softly. "Even at the end, even when she was scared and alone, she knew. That's why she made sure I had the ring. She wanted you to find me. She wanted us to find each other." Richard looked at his daughter through tears. "How are you so wise?" Valerie managed a small smile. "I had to grow up fast. No choice in the matter." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the ring. Isabella's wedding ring. The ring that had started everything. Should we leave this with her, so she has it back?" Richard considered this. Part of him wanted to say yes, wanted to reunite Isabella with the symbol of their love. But another part understood the deeper truth. "No," he said finally. "She gave that to you. She wanted you to have it, to keep it safe, to use it to find your way home. Keeping it honors her sacrifice more than burying it ever could." Valerie nodded, closing her fingers around the ring. "Then I'll keep it, always." The identification process took 3 weeks. DNA extracted from the remains was compared against samples from Richard and Valerie. Dental records from Isabella's dentist were matched to the skull. Every scientific test confirmed what they already knew in their hearts. They'd found Isabella Sanders. The news coverage was intense. "Billionaire's wife found after 27 years," screamed the headlines. "Daughter discovers father through mother's ring." Reporters camped outside Richard's mansion, called Valerie's phone at all hours, dug into every detail of their lives. Patrick Moore handled most of it, setting up a single press conference where Richard and Valerie made a brief statement asking for privacy during this difficult time. They announced the creation of the Isabella Sanders Foundation, dedicated to helping orphaned children and supporting families of missing persons. But privately, behind closed doors, Richard was planning something else entirely. A proper goodbye. The funeral was held on a crisp October morning. Exactly 27 years and 3 weeks after Isabella had disappeared, Richard had chosen a spot in the family mausoleum at Forest Lawn Cemetery, a beautiful marble structure overlooking the city Isabella had loved. The service was small, intimate, just family, which now meant Richard and Valerie, and a few of Isabella's oldest friends who'd never stopped believing she deserved justice. Sister Margaret had made the trip from Austin, her aged hands clutching a rosary as she prayed for the woman whose daughter she'd helped raise. Patrick Moore attended, standing respectfully at the back. Even Inspector Ramirez had flown in from Guatemala, his presence a quiet reminder that justice had finally been served. The priest spoke of eternal rest, of souls reunited with God, of the peace that comes after suffering. But Richard barely heard the words. He was too focused on the sleek casket before him, on the knowledge that Isabella was finally home, finally safe, finally at rest. When it was time for eulogies, Richard stood on shaking legs. He'd prepared notes but found he couldn't read them. Instead, he spoke from the heart. "Isabella was the best person I've ever known," he said, his voice carrying across the small gathering. "She was kind when the world was cruel. She was hopeful when others despaired. She loved deeply, laughed freely, and saw beauty in everything." He paused, composing himself. "She was taken from us in the most horrible way imaginable, but even in her darkest moment, even when she was terrified and alone and dying, she thought of others. She thought of our daughter. She made sure Valerie would survive, would be found, would have a chance at life." He looked at Valerie, who stood beside him, tears streaming down her face. "Because of Isabella's sacrifice, I got my daughter back. Because of her love, Valerie knew she was wanted. Even when she thought she was alone, because of her courage. We're standing here today as a family." His voice broke. "I loved you, Bella. I will always love you. And I promise you I'll take care of our girl. I'll give her all the love you couldn't. I'll be the father you wanted me to be." He placed a single white rose, Isabella's favorite, on the casket. Then Valerie stepped forward. She'd written something too, had spent days crafting the perfect words. But like her father, she found she couldn't read from paper. "I never met you," she said, addressing the casket directly. "I never got to hear your voice or feel your arms around me. I never got to call you Mom or tell you I loved you. But I know you loved me. You died making sure I'd live. And that's the greatest gift anyone could ever give." She pulled out the ring, holding it up so it caught the sunlight. "I'll wear this every day for the rest of my life. Not just because it's beautiful, not just because it brought me and Dad together, but because it's proof. Proof that a mother's love can survive anything, even death, even 27 years, even the worst evil someone could do." She placed her own white rose beside Richard's. "Rest now, Mom. You did good. You saved me. And now Dad and I are going to make sure your life meant something. We're going to help other kids like me. Other families torn apart like ours. We're going to turn this tragedy into something beautiful, because that's what you would have wanted." As they lowered the casket into the mausoleum, the priest began the final prayers. Richard and Valerie stood together, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. The sun broke through the clouds, sending shafts of golden light across the cemetery. Somewhere nearby, a bird sang. Life continued, relentless and beautiful and painful all at once. Isabella Sanders was finally home, and her family, broken and reformed, scarred but healing, could finally begin to move forward. The Los Angeles County Superior Courthouse was a fortress of marble and glass, its halls echoing with the footsteps of lawyers, defendants and families seeking justice. Richard had been inside these walls countless times over the past 6 months. Preliminary hearings, motions, depositions. But today was different. Today, Arthur Coleman's trial began. Richard sat in the front row of the gallery, Valerie on one side, Patrick Moore on the other. Behind them, the courtroom was packed with reporters, curious onlookers, and a few of Isabella's old friends who'd waited 27 years for this moment. Arthur was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him. He'd aged dramatically since his arrest. Hair completely gray now, face gaunt, shoulders hunched. He looked like what he was, a broken man facing the consequences of his actions. Their eyes met for just a moment. Arthur looked away first. "All rise," the bailiff called. "The Honorable Judge Patricia Mendoza presiding." The judge entered, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She'd built her reputation on being fair but unforgiving when it came to violent crimes. "Please be seated," Judge Mendoza said, settling into her chair. "We're here for the trial of Arthur James Coleman, charged with kidnapping, felony murder, and unlawful disposal of human remains. Is the prosecution ready?" District Attorney Marcus Webb stood. He was in his 40s, with the confident bearing of someone who'd never lost a major case. "We are, Your Honor." Defense. Arthur's lawyer, a tired-looking public defender named Sarah Hartley, rose slowly. Arthur's assets had been frozen pending the outcome of the trial, leaving him unable to afford the high-powered attorneys he'd once employed for business dealings. "Yes, Your Honor." "Then let's begin with opening statements." DeWebb's opening was devastating. He laid out the entire timeline in meticulous detail. Arthur's obsession with Isabella, the business partnership gone sour, the suspicious cash withdrawals, the kidnapping, Isabella's death, and Arthur's flight to Guatemala. "The evidence will show," Webb said, pacing before the jury, "that Arthur Coleman committed these crimes not in a moment of passion, not by accident, but with cold, calculated premeditation. He hired accomplices. He prepared a location to hide his victim. He planned every detail except one. He didn't plan for Isabella Sanders' extraordinary courage in saving her unborn child." He turned to look at Valerie. "That child, now a 27-year-old woman, sits in this courtroom today. She's here because her mother, dying and alone, made sure she would survive. She's here because one of Arthur Coleman's hired men had a conscience and chose mercy over murder. And she's here to see justice done for the mother she never got to know." Several jurors wiped their eyes. When it was the defense's turn, Sarah Hartley did her best with an impossible case. "My client made terrible mistakes," she admitted. "He won't deny that. But this was never murder. Arthur Coleman never intended for Isabella Sanders to die. He panicked when she went into labor. He made catastrophic errors in judgment, but intent matters under the law. This is a tragedy, not first-degree murder." It was a weak argument, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. The prosecution's case was methodical and overwhelming. They called witness after witness, built their case brick by brick. Patrick Moore testified about the investigation, the trail to Guatemala, Arthur's eventual confession. He was calm, professional, presenting evidence like the seasoned investigator he was. Inspector Ramirez testified about Arthur's initial denials, then his breakdown when confronted with proof that Valerie was alive. He said, and I quote, "I thought the baby was dead. I swear to God, I thought the baby was dead." Those were his exact words. Dr. Sarah Chen, the forensic anthropologist, explained how Isabella's remains had been found. The evidence of trauma, consistent with dying from childbirth complications without medical intervention. Her testimony was clinical but horrifying in its implications. Isabella had suffered for days before dying. The most damning testimony came from Marcus Rodriguez, the man Arthur had hired to guard Isabella. He'd been tracked down by Moore's team in Arizona, living under an assumed name, and had been granted immunity in exchange for his cooperation. "Arthur paid me and my brother $5,000 each," Marcus testified, his voice heavy with shame. "Said he needed us to scare some woman, rough up her house, make it look like a robbery. But then he had us bring her to that warehouse. She was pregnant, terrified. I knew it was wrong, but I needed the money." "What happened when Isabella went into labor?" Webb asked. "Arthur panicked, called me, told me to watch her, make sure she didn't escape. Then he left." Marcus's hands trembled. "She was in so much pain, screaming. My brother wanted to call an ambulance, but I wouldn't let him. We were already in too deep. Tell the jury about the birth." Marcus closed his eyes. "It took hours. She kept begging for help, for water, for someone to call her husband. Finally, the baby came. A little girl. Isabella wrapped her in her jacket, held her, cried over her. She was so weak, bleeding so much. She knew she was dying. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of Valerie's quiet crying." "What did Isabella say to you?" Webb prompted gently. "She took off her wedding ring, pressed it into my hand along with the baby. She said, 'Please, please don't let my baby die. Take her somewhere safe. Make sure she knows she was loved.' Then she made me promise. She wouldn't let go of my hand until I promised." "And did you keep that promise?" "Yes. I took the baby to an orphanage in Austin, tied the ring to her wrist like Isabella asked. Then I ran, changed my name, tried to forget, but I never could." "What about your brother?" Marcus's face darkened. "He died 6 months later. Overdose. I think the guilt killed him." When it was the defense's turn to cross-examine, Sarah Hartley approached carefully. "Mr. Rodriguez, you were granted immunity for your testimony, correct?" "Yes." "So you have every incentive to paint my client in the worst possible light and yourself as a reluctant participant." "I'm telling the truth," Marcus said firmly. "I've lived with what I did every day for 27 years. I'm not looking for forgiveness. I just want that little girl, that woman, to know her mother loved her enough to die for her." The trial lasted 3 weeks. The defense called character witnesses who testified that Arthur had been a good man before his life fell apart. They brought in a psychologist who claimed Arthur had experienced a mental break due to the stress of losing his business, but none of it mattered against the mountain of evidence. On the final day, both sides gave closing arguments. Webb was passionate and precise, hammering home the premeditation, the cruelty, the 27 years of lies. Hartley did her best, arguing for manslaughter instead of murder, pleading for the jury to consider Arthur's mental state. Then it was time for the jury to deliberate. They were out for 8 hours. Richard and Valerie waited in a small room off the main corridor, neither eating nor speaking much. Patrick Moore brought them coffee. They didn't drink. Sister Margaret, who'd attended every day of the trial, said prayers. When the bailiff finally called them back, Richard's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst through his chest. The jury filed in, faces grave. Richard tried to read their expressions, but couldn't. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Mendoza asked. The foreman, a middle-aged woman in a blue cardigan, stood. "We have, Your Honor. On the charge of kidnapping, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of felony murder, guilty. On the charge of unlawful disposal of human remains, guilty." The courtroom erupted. Richard heard Valerie sob beside him. felt her collapse against his shoulder. He held her tight, his own tears falling freely. Arthur's head dropped into his hands. Sarah Hartley put a comforting hand on his shoulder, but there was nothing she could do now. Judge Mendoza banged her gavel. "Order. I will have order in this courtroom." When the room quieted, she continued, "Mr. Coleman, you will be remanded into custody pending sentencing, which will occur in 30 days, bailiff. Please remove the defendant." As Arthur was led away, he turned one last time to look at Richard and Valerie. His mouth moved, forming words they couldn't hear. It might have been, "I'm sorry," but it was too late for apologies. The damage was done. Isabella was gone. But justice, finally, had been served. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by cameras and microphones, Day Webb made a brief statement. Richard and Valerie stood beside him, holding hands. "Today, justice was served for Isabella Sanders," Webb said. "A woman who was stolen from her family, who died alone and afraid, but who in her final moments showed extraordinary courage and love. Her death was a tragedy, but her legacy, the daughter she saved, the foundation created in her name, the countless children who will be helped because of this family's determination to turn tragedy into hope, that legacy will live on." He stepped aside, giving Richard the microphone. Richard looked at the cameras, at the reporters, at the crowd that had gathered. "I want to thank the prosecution, the investigators, Inspector Ramirez and his team in Guatemala, and everyone who worked tirelessly to bring Arthur Coleman to justice. But most of all, I want to thank my daughter, Valerie, whose strength and courage have inspired me every day." He turned to her, his voice breaking. "Isabella would be so proud of the woman you've become, and I promise her, that we'll make sure her sacrifice wasn't in vain." Valerie stepped forward, her voice strong despite the tears. "My mother died saving me. Now my father and I are dedicating our lives to saving others. The Isabella Sanders Foundation will help orphaned children, support families of missing persons, and ensure that no child ever feels as alone as I once did. That's Mom's legacy. That's how we honor her memory." As they walked away from the courthouse, Richard's arm around Valerie's shoulders, he felt something he hadn't felt in 27 years. Peace, not happiness. That would take time, but peace. The war was over. The battle was won. Isabella could finally rest, and they could finally begin to heal. The morning of Isabella's burial dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect California day she'd always loved. Richard stood in his bedroom, adjusting his black tie in the mirror, and caught sight of the photograph on his nightstand, the last picture ever taken of Isabella, smiling and radiant despite being 8 months pregnant. "I'm bringing you home today, Bella," he whispered. Finally, a soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Valerie stood in the doorway, dressed in a simple black dress, her hair pulled back. Isabella's wedding ring hung on its leather cord around her neck, visible against the dark fabric. "Are you ready?" she asked quietly. Richard nodded, not trusting his voice. Together, they headed downstairs where a car waited to take them to Forest Lawn Cemetery. The mausoleum Richard had chosen was a beautiful structure of white marble, nestled on a hillside with a view of Los Angeles spreading out below. It was the same mausoleum where his parents were buried. Where his grandparents rested now, Isabella would join them. Finally, part of the family she'd been stolen from 27 years ago. The gathering was larger than the initial funeral service had been, now that Arthur's trial was over, now that justice had been served. People felt they could properly say goodbye. Isabella's college roommate had flown in from New York. Former colleagues from the hospital where she'd volunteered stood in quiet clusters. Even a few of Richard's business associates had come, men and women who remembered the vibrant woman who'd once lit up every room she entered. Sister Margaret was there, of course, leaning heavily on her cane. She'd made the journey from Austin specifically for this moment, bringing with her several other nuns who'd helped raise Valerie. "She would have been so grateful," Sister Margaret said, gripping Valerie's hand. "Knowing that you turned out so wonderfully, despite everything. You helped raise me," Valerie replied, her voice thick with emotion. "You and the other sisters. You gave me love when I had nothing. I'll never forget that." The old nun's eyes filled with tears. "We did our best, but I always wondered about your mother. What kind of woman she must have been to make such a sacrifice, now I know." She looked at the casket, draped in white roses. She was extraordinary. Patrick Moore stood at a respectful distance, his presence a quiet reminder of how they'd gotten here. He'd become more than just an investigator to Richard and Valerie. He was a friend, someone who'd seen them through the darkest period of their lives. Even Inspector Ramirez had returned from Guatemala, his weathered face solemn as he paid his respects. The ceremony began at 10 o'clock sharp. Father Thomas, the priest who'd known Isabella years ago, stood before the gathered mourners. "We are here today," he began, his voice carrying across the hillside, "to lay to rest Isabella Marie Sanders, beloved wife, devoted mother, and a woman whose final act of love has echoed across 27 years. He spoke of Isabella's life, her childhood in San Diego, her passion for helping others, her joy when she discovered she was pregnant. He spoke of the tragedy of her disappearance, the years of uncertainty, and finally, the bittersweet discovery that brought both closure and heartbreak. Isabella's story is one of the ultimate sacrifice, Father Thomas said. In her darkest hour, faced with her own mortality, she didn't think of herself. She thought only of saving her child. That kind of love is rare and precious. It's the kind of love that transforms tragedy into something sacred. Valerie gripped Richard's hand tightly, tears streaming down her face. When it was time for personal remembrances, Richard stood first. He'd written and rewritten his eulogy a dozen times. But standing here now, looking at the casket that held all that remained of his wife, the prepared words felt inadequate. "Isabella and I met when we were 23, he began, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. She was volunteering at a children's hospital, reading stories to sick kids. I was there visiting a friend's son, and I got lost trying to find his room. Isabella saw me wandering the halls looking confused and offered to help." A few people chuckled softly at the image. She had this smile that it lit up everything around her. By the time we found the room I was looking for, I'd already fallen in love. I asked her to dinner that same day. She said yes, and that was it. From that moment on, she was my whole world. His voice cracked, but he pushed on. We had 5 beautiful years together. 5 years of laughter and dreams and plans for the future. When she told me she was pregnant, I thought I couldn't possibly be happier. I was wrong. Every day with Isabella was better than the last. Every moment was a gift I didn't deserve. He looked at Valerie. Then she was taken from me, and I thought my life was over. For 27 years, I existed but didn't really live. I built an empire, made more money than I could ever spend, but none of it mattered because she was gone. Then, by some miracle, by Isabella's final act of love, our daughter walked back into my life. And suddenly, I had a reason to keep going, a reason to honor Isabella's sacrifice, a reason to live again. He turned back to the casket. "Thank you, Bella. Thank you for the years we had together. Thank you for our daughter. Thank you for showing me what real love looks like. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of what you gave me." He placed a white rose on the casket, his hand lingering on the polished wood for a long moment before he stepped back. Valerie stood next, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. The weight of everything, finding her father, learning her mother's story, witnessing Arthur's trial, and now finally saying goodbye to a woman she'd never known. It all pressed down on her at once. "I don't have memories of you," she finally said, addressing the casket directly. "I don't know what your voice sounded like or how you laughed. I don't know if you liked coffee or tea, if you were a morning person or a night owl, if you preferred summer or winter." Her voice grew stronger. "But I know the most important thing. I know you loved me. Not just regular love, but the kind of love that's willing to die so someone else can live. You were bleeding, dying, terrified, and you still made sure I would survive. You gave me your most precious possession and trusted a stranger to save me." She touched the ring around her neck. "Because of you, I found my father. Because of you, I know where I come from. Because of you, I understand what real courage looks like." Tears flowed freely now. "I'm sorry I never got to meet you. I'm sorry I can't remember your face or your touch. I'm sorry you died alone and scared. But I promise you, Mom. I promise I'll make your sacrifice mean something. Dad and I are going to help so many kids, so many families. We're going to turn your tragedy into hope for others." She placed her rose next to Richard's. "Rest now. You did everything a mother could do. You saved me, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making you proud." as the priest said the final prayers, as they lowered Isabella's casket into its final resting place. Richard felt Valerie lean against him. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, and together they watched as the woman who connected them was laid to rest. The cemetery workers began to seal the mausoleum, their movements respectful and efficient. One by one, the mourners came forward, placing flowers, saying quiet prayers, paying their final respects. Sister Margaret stood before the casket for a long time, her lips moving in silent prayer. When she finally turned away, her ancient face was peaceful. "She's home now," the old nun said to Richard and Valerie. "She's finally home." After everyone else had left, after the flowers had been arranged and the mausoleum sealed, Richard and Valerie stood alone on the hillside. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Do you think she knows?" Valerie asked quietly. "Do you think she knows we found each other? That Arthur was punished? That we're okay?" Richard looked at the mausoleum, at the fresh flowers, at the name carved in marble. Isabella Marie Sanders, beloved wife and mother. "Yes," he said with certainty. "I think she knows. I think she's been watching over us this whole time, guiding us toward each other. That's the only explanation for how everything came together. The ring, the meeting at the event venue, all of it. It was Isabella bringing us home." Valerie nodded, wiping her eyes. "I used to be so angry at her. When I was a kid, I'd lie awake at night wondering why she abandoned me, why she didn't want me. Now I know she wanted me more than anything. She just didn't get the chance to show me. She showed you in the only way she could," Richard said. "She gave you life, twice. Once when she brought you into this world, and again when she made sure you'd survive even after she was gone." They stood in silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The city below came alive with lights. Millions of people living their lives, unaware of the quiet moment of closure happening on this hillside. "We should go," Valerie said eventually. "We have the foundation meeting tomorrow. Lots of work to do. Lots of work," Richard agreed. "But tonight, let's just be here with her a little longer." So they stood together, father and daughter, as night fell over Los Angeles, and in the peaceful silence, surrounded by marble and flowers and the love that had survived death itself, Isabella Sanders finally rested in peace. Her story was over, but the legacy she'd left behind, the daughter she'd saved, the family she'd reunited, the hope she'd inspired, that legacy was just beginning. 6 months after Isabella's burial, Valerie stood in what used to be a corporate conference room on the 3rd floor of Sanders Tower. Now, it was the headquarters of the Isabella Sanders Foundation. The walls were painted warm cream, and photographs of smiling children lined one side, kids already helped by the foundation. "The architect says we can knock out this wall," Richard said. "Create an open space for when kids visit. Maybe add bookshelves, a reading corner." Valerie smiled. "Mom would have loved that. She used to read to kids at the hospital. I remember." Richard's expression softened. "She did all the character voices. The kids would light up when they saw her coming. It still hurt to talk about Isabella, but the pain had changed. Softer now, tinged with warmth rather than raw grief. They were learning to remember her with love instead of only loss." Miss Collins, a young woman, appeared. Jennifer Martinez, the foundation's program director. "The reporter from the Times is here." Valerie took a deep breath. She'd done dozens of interviews, but they never got easier. Sharing her story was exhausting, but necessary. Every interview meant more awareness, more donations, more children helped. "Send her in," Valerie said. Richard squeezed her shoulder. "You've got this." But as the reporter entered, Valerie realized she didn't need Richard to stay. She could do this alone. She was learning to stand on her own feet. Finally, the first months after the trial had been hardest, Valerie had moved into the mansion but felt like an imposter, constantly worried she didn't belong in Richard's world. "You belong here because you're my daughter," Richard had told her one night. "Not because of money or status. You belong here because you're family." But knowing it intellectually and believing it emotionally were different things. The breakthrough came during a visit to St. Teresa's home. Richard had offered to donate money for renovations. But when they'd arrived, Valerie had seen the current orphans, kids with that same look she remembered from childhood. guarded hope, wanting to believe in good things but afraid to trust. "I want to do more than write a check," she told Richard. "I want these kids to know that someone exactly where they are now made it out, found a family." That's when the foundation had truly taken shape, not just as charity, but as Valerie's purpose, her way of transforming childhood pain into something meaningful. "So tell me," the reporter, Lisa Chen, said, settling with her recorder, "what's a typical day like now?" Valerie smiled. "There's no such thing as typical anymore. Some days I'm here working with Jennifer on programming. We're developing a mentorship initiative where successful adults who grew up in foster care can connect with current kids in the system. And other days, I visit group homes and orphanages, talking to kids directly, letting them know being an orphan doesn't define your life, that you can find family in unexpected places." She touched the ring at her throat. "And some days, I'm just being a daughter, learning about my mom from Dad's stories, making up for lost time." "How has your relationship with your father evolved?" Valerie considered. "At first, awkward. We were strangers connected by DNA and tragedy, but we worked at it, had family dinners even when conversation was stilted, watched movies together even when it felt forced. Gradually, it stopped feeling forced. Now he's not just my father, he's my dad." What would you say to other orphans reading this? "I'd tell them that family isn't just biology. Yes, I found my biological father, and that's been incredible. But the nuns who raised me, they were family too. Sister Margaret was family." She leaned forward. "You don't need to find birth parents to have a family. You need people who love you, support you, and show up for you. That's what family really means." Lisa nodded. "One more question. Arthur Coleman was sentenced to 45 years. Any feelings about that?" Valerie was quiet. "I'm glad he was caught. I'm glad he can't hurt anyone else. But mostly, I feel sad. Sad that his jealousy destroyed so many lives. My mother's. His own. The men he hired. All that destruction because one man couldn't let go of his anger. Do you think you'll ever forgive him?" "I don't know. Maybe someday. Right now, I'm focused on honoring my mother's memory, not hating the man who killed her. Hate takes too much energy. I'd rather use that energy to help people." After the interview, Valerie found Richard in his office on the phone. $5 million for the scholarship fund, he was saying, and another $2 million for St. Teresa's renovation. "Yes, I know it's a lot. That's the point." He hung up and smiled. "How'd the interview go?" "Good." She asked good questions. "I'm proud of you. You know that, right?" Richard's voice was thick with emotion. "The way you've handled everything. You're stronger than I ever was." "I learned from the best," Valerie said. Sitting down. "Actually, I wanted to talk about something. Jennifer and I were thinking about expanding the foundation, not just helping orphans, but also families of missing persons. People like you, who spent years not knowing." Richard's eyes widened. "That's brilliant. What would that look like?" "Support groups, helping fund investigations for families who can't afford private detectives, partnering with law enforcement, keeping cold cases from going completely cold." "Valerie, that's incredible. Your mother would be so proud." "There's something else," she said. "I want to go back to school, finish my degree, maybe social work or psychology. I want to actually know what I'm doing when I help these kids. Whatever you want to study, wherever you want to go, I'll support you completely. I was thinking UCLA, so I can stay close, keep working with the foundation part-time." "Valerie," Richard put his hands on her shoulders, "you don't need my permission. You're 27. You can make your own decisions. I know, but I want your input. You're my dad. Your opinion matters." Richard's eyes glistened. "Ukulele is perfect, and you're perfect, and I'm the luckiest father in the world." That evening, Valerie stood on the mansion balcony, watching the sunset over Los Angeles. The city stretched out before her, millions of lights beginning to twinkle. Somewhere out there were orphans wondering if anyone would want them, families searching for missing loved ones, people struggling with pain and loss. But also out there were people being helped, lives being changed, hope being restored, because of the foundation, because of Isabella's sacrifice. Valerie touched the ring at her throat. "We're doing it, Mom," she whispered. We're turning your tragedy into hope. We're saving people, just like you saved me." Behind her, the sliding door opened. Richard stepped out with 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one and stood beside her. "Beautiful night," he said. "Yeah," Valerie agreed. "It really is." For the first time in her life, Valerie Collins, Valerie Sanders, felt truly at peace. She had a father who loved her, a purpose that fulfilled her, a future that excited rather than terrified her. She'd started life abandoned on an orphanage doorstep, with nothing but a ring and a blood-stained blanket. Now she had everything that mattered. And it was all because of a mother's love that had survived death itself. 1 year after their first meeting at Château Étoile, Richard stood backstage at the Los Angeles Convention Center, adjusting his tie for the 3rd time. His hands were shaking, not from nerves about the speech he was about to give, but from the overwhelming emotion of what this night represented. "Dad, you're going to strangle yourself with that tie if you keep messing with it," Valerie said, appearing beside him. She looked stunning in a navy blue dress, her hair styled elegantly. But it was the ring, Isabella's ring, hanging proudly on a delicate gold chain around her neck that truly made her shine. "I can't help it," Richard admitted. It's everything, isn't it? Everything your mother would have wanted." "It is," Valerie agreed, squeezing his hand. "So, let's go show her what we've built." The grand ballroom was filled to capacity. Over 500 people had gathered for the first annual Isabella Sanders Foundation Gala. Donors, volunteers, families who'd been helped by the foundation, and dozens of children from orphanages and group homes throughout California. As Richard and Valerie made their way to the stage, he scanned the crowd. Sister Margaret sat at a table near the front. Beaming with pride, Jennifer Martinez was coordinating with the AV team. Ensuring everything ran smoothly, Patrick Moore had brought his wife, both dressed to the nines. Even Inspector Ramirez had made the journey from Guatemala, insisting he wouldn't miss this for the world. But the tables that meant the most were those filled with children, kids ranging from 5 to 17, all dressed in their finest clothes, all wearing expressions of wonder as they took in the elegant surroundings. Many of them had never been to an event like this. Many had never felt this special, this valued. That was exactly the point. The lights dimmed, and a video began playing on the massive screens flanking the stage. It opened with a photograph of Isabella, young, beautiful, laughing at the camera, before transitioning to images of the foundation's work over the past year. There were shots of newly renovated playrooms at St. Teresa's home, pictures of children participating in the mentorship program, paired with successful adults who'd once been in their shoes, videos of support group meetings where families of missing persons found comfort in shared experiences. The statistics scrolled across the screen. 247 children directly helped, 89 families connected with resources and support, $3.2 million raised and deployed for programs, 12 cold cases reopened with foundation assistance, but more powerful than the numbers were the faces. Children smiling, parents crying tears of relief, families reunited, hope restored. The video ended with Valerie's voice. "My mother died saving me. Now we're dedicated to saving others. That's her legacy. That's how we honor her memory." The lights came back up, and Richard stepped to the podium. The applause was thunderous. "Thank you," he said, his voice carrying across the ballroom. "Thank you all for being here tonight, and more importantly, thank you for believing in the mission of this foundation." He paused, composing himself. "A year ago, I was a man who'd spent 27 years living in the past. I'd built a successful company, made more money than I could ever spend, but inside, I was hollow, empty, just going through the motions of existence because the woman I loved had been stolen from me." His eyes found Valerie in the wings, and he smiled. "Then, by a miracle I still don't fully understand, my daughter walked back into my life. She was wearing her mother's ring, the ring Isabella had tied to her wrist with her dying breath, and suddenly, I had a reason to live again. But this foundation isn't about me, or even about my daughter. It's about every child who's ever felt unwanted, every family that's ever suffered the agony of not knowing what happened to someone they love, every person who's ever wondered if their pain has a purpose." He gestured to the tables of children. I want you all to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say. You are not defined by your circumstances. You are not less valuable because you don't have traditional families. You are not broken or damaged or unwanted. You are precious. You are worthy of love. And you have the power to transform your own stories, just like my daughter transformed hers. The children sat up straighter, many of them wiping tears. Isabella Sanders never got to raise her daughter, Richard continued, his voice breaking. She never got to see her first steps, hear her first words, celebrate her birthdays, or watch her grow into the incredible woman she is today. But she made sure Valerie would have a chance at life. She made sure that even in death, her love would endure. He pulled out a handkerchief, not bothering to hide his tears. That's what this foundation is about. Enduring love. Love that survives tragedy. Love that transforms pain into purpose. Love that says, you matter, even when the world tells you otherwise. The applause started again. But Richard held up a hand. I'm not done yet. I want to introduce someone very special. Someone who is the heart and soul of this foundation. Someone who took the worst start imaginable and turned it into a mission to help others. My daughter, Valerie Sanders. Valerie walked onto the stage to a standing ovation. She hugged her father tightly before taking her place at the podium. Hi, she said. And despite the microphone, her voice sounded small in the massive space. She took a breath and started again. Stronger this time. Hi, I'm Valerie. And a year ago, I was a waitress trying to make rent on a studio apartment. I had no family, no real prospects, and no idea who I was or where I came from. She touched the ring at her throat. All I had was this, a ring my mother had given me before she died, a ring I'd worn every day of my life, never knowing it would lead me to my father, to the truth about what happened to my mom, and eventually, to this moment. She looked out at the children. I see some of you out there, and I recognize that look in your eyes. It's the same look I had for 27 years. That look that says, I'm alone, nobody wants me, I'm not good enough, and I want to tell you something very important. That look is lying to you. A few kids leaned forward, hanging on her words. You are wanted, you are good enough, and you are not alone. She smiled. I know it doesn't feel that way sometimes. I know the nights are long and the days are hard, and sometimes it feels like nobody in the world cares whether you exist. But I'm here to tell you that someone cares. This foundation cares. My dad cares. I care. She paused, gathering her thoughts. My mother never got to tell me she loved me. She never got to tuck me in at night or help me with homework or teach me to ride a bike. But she loved me so much that with her dying breath, she made sure I'd survive. She gave me her most precious possession and trusted a stranger to save me. That's real love. Love that doesn't need words or years together. Love that just is. And that's what I want you to know tonight. Whether your parents are alive or dead, whether they gave you up by choice or by circumstance, whether you ever find them or not, you are loved. Maybe not by the people you wish loved you, but you are loved. By someone, by people in this room, by people you haven't even met yet. Her voice strengthened. Your story isn't over. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning. You have the power to write the next chapters. You have the power to turn your pain into purpose, just like I'm doing, just like my dad is doing, just like everyone in this room who's ever suffered and survived is doing. She pulled the ring from around her neck, holding it up so it caught the light. This ring represents eternal love, love that survives death, love that brings families together across impossible odds, love that says, I will never give up on you. That's what this foundation represents too. We will never give up on you. We will fight for you, believe in you, and support you as you become who you're meant to be. Because that's what my mother would have done. That's what she did do. With her last breath, Valerie's eyes swept across the crowd. So to every child here tonight, to every orphan, to every kid in foster care, to everyone who's ever felt alone, I see you. We see you. You matter. Your life has value and meaning and purpose, and we're going to spend every day proving that to you. The applause was deafening. Children were crying. Adults were crying. Even Richard, standing in the wings, had tears streaming down his face as the gala continued. Dinner, dancing, testimonials from families who'd been helped. Richard and Valerie found themselves standing together on a balcony overlooking the city. "She would have loved this," Richard said quietly. "Isabella would have been so proud of you." "Of us," Valerie corrected. "We did this together." Richard pulled his daughter close. "I spent 27 years thinking my life was over when Isabella died. I was wrong. It was just paused, waiting for you to come home and help me start living again. I spent 27 years thinking I was nobody," Valerie said. "I was wrong too. I was always somebody. I was Isabella's daughter. Your daughter. I just didn't know it yet." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights twinkle below. "What happens now?" Valerie asked eventually. "We've built the foundation, honored Mom's memory, helped hundreds of kids. What's next?" Richard smiled. "We keep going. We help thousands more kids, tens of thousands. We expand the foundation nationwide, maybe even worldwide. We make sure Isabella's legacy touches as many lives as possible. And we live," Valerie added. "Really live, not just exist, but actually experience joy and love and family, because that's what Mom would have wanted. Not for us to be frozen in grief, but to embrace life." "Yes," Richard agreed. "We live together." Inside, the music swelled. Through the glass doors, they could see children dancing, laughing, being kids, families connecting, hope blooming in hearts that had known too much darkness. Valerie looked down at the ring in her hand, the ring that had started everything, the ring that had survived 27 years to bring her home, the ring that represented a mother's eternal love. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered. "Thank you for saving me. Thank you for leading me to Dad. Thank you for showing me what real love looks like." She put the ring back around her neck, feeling its familiar weight settle against her heart. And somewhere, perhaps in the stars above, or in the love that filled the ballroom, or in the very air they breathed, Isabella Sanders smiled. Her daughter was home. Her husband had found peace. Her legacy would live forever. The ring of eternity had come full circle, and love, real, enduring, unconquerable love, had won.